Hey guys, how are we doing? We're here. We're doing the final question in the January 2017 Common Core Algebra 2 exam, Part 4, number 37. That's our 6-pointer, and I thought this was actually not bad. There was a little part where they kind of tried to trick us, but not bad at all. And this is Mr. Chavla or Mr. C. All right, let's go. Last question. 37. Oops, went far down too much. Okay. So the speed of a tidal wave, which is s, is measured in hundreds of miles per hour. That's where they kind of tried to throw us off. So what that means, if s is 1, that means 100 miles per hour. S equals 3 would be 300 miles per hour. All right, so can be modeled by the equation s, which is, again is the speed in hundreds of miles per hour, equals square root of t minus 2t plus 6, where t represents the time from its origin in hours. Algebraically determine the time when s equals 0. So I'm going to substitute 0 for s in the original equation. I get 0 equals square root of t, and then outside the square root sign, minus 2t plus 6. Now, usually when we're solving a square root equation like this, we want to get whatever's in the square root sign, the square root expression, by itself. So anything that's not in the square root sign, I'm going to move to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to add 2t and subtract 6 on both sides. Right? And then square root of t is by itself on the right-hand side. And then the other side, let me write that a little more neatly, guys. I'm sorry. Or you know that if we add 2t, because we have 0 on the other side, adding 2t just makes it 2t. Subtracting 6 makes it negative 6. So I get 2t minus 6 equals square root of t. Now I have the square root expression all by itself, which is part of the goal. Now the next, well, it's not the goal, it's part of the plan to get to our goal, which is to solve this equation. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the square root sign on the right hand side, because we can't solve this equation algebraically, because that's what they said to do, when there's a square root. So we need to square this to get rid of the square root, but whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. So I put this in parentheses and square it. Now there's a shortcut to squaring the binomial. I want to make sure you know how to do this, guys. When you square a binomial, the first thing you're going to do is you square the first term. 2t, when you square it, becomes 4t squared. To get the middle term, you multiply the two terms. 2t times negative 6 is negative 12t, and then you double the product. So you take the product, which is negative 12t, right? And you double it, and you get negative 24t. And then the last thing we do is we square the final term, and it's always going to be positive. When you square negative 6, it's still positive 36. So that's the shortcut to squaring a binomial. All right, I'm going to minimize me for now so we can see everything. Otherwise, you have to work with FOIL and work it out, which is not a bad thing, but it's really useful to know this shortcut to squaring a binomial. It's one of the ways. Now the other side, guys, when I square a square root, they cancel, right? So we just get t. Now I'm going to set this equation equal to 0 by subtracting t on both sides. So it becomes 4t squared, negative 24t minus t, or minus 1t, becomes negative 25t plus 36 equals 0. Now I'd been debating before making this video whether I want to do this by means of the quadratic formula or factoring, because this could be factored, but the numbers are kind of large. The a value is not 1, and the b and c value is kind of large. And so then I was like, okay, maybe we should use the quadratic formula. But I decided after all that factoring is more useful because it takes up less space, and also I have a cool little trick. I'm not going to take credit for it, even though nobody taught me this. I learned factoring by grouping, and I learned what's called the borrow payback method, and I kind of made my own version of factoring. So while I don't take credit for this because I don't know if anyone else came up with this method. Nobody taught me this. I kind of discovered it by chance, and it works every single time. And I know it works because it's based on the same mathematical principles as the other methods. But anyway, here's how I'm going to factor this. First thing I do is I multiply the AC value. That's the same whether you're doing factor by grouping, borrow payback, or the method I'm going to show you, right? A is equal to 4. That's the coefficient of t squared. C is equal to 36. I'm going to multiply 4 by 36 and find out what that is. Four times 36 is 144. Okay. Now here's how I'm going to do this. I find this method, so this is what you want is just like when you do factor by grouping, or if you were to do what's called borrow payback, right? My method, I guess, is like an alternate method for borrow payback. It's just, I feel like it's a little more direct and also more direct than factor by grouping. But this first step is still the same. You want two factors of 144, two numbers that multiply to that and also add to negative 25. Now, if you check, guys, if I do negative 16 times negative 9 is positive 144. And if I do negative 16 minus 9, I get negative 25. So those are the two numbers. Now here's where my method is different. So it's negative 16 times negative 9 is how we get 144 as a product and negative 25 as a sum. So that's what we got. Now here's where my method is different than factor by grouping or borrow payback. Here's how I'm going to do this. We got negative 16 and negative 9, right? Now let's say that the leading coefficient was 1. Let's say it was just t squared minus 25t minus 144, right? The two numbers that multiply to negative 140, positive 144 and add to negative 25 would be these two right here. But we didn't have a positive 1 as our a value. We had positive 4. So what I like to do is, instead of having t minus 16 and t minus 9, I'm going to put a 4. The a value was 4. So I'm going to put that right here in front of both the coefficients as a coefficient of both x's. Now, this works really well because all you have to do, this obviously is not the correctly factored form. So the only difference, guys, is I just put I put the numbers that add to negative 25 or b value and multiply it to the a times c, which was 144, right? I put them in directly, and then I put the a value of 4 in front of both binomials as a leading coefficient. Now here's what you have to do. This clearly is not the correctly factored form to give you 4t squared minus 25t plus 36. You look to see if there's a GCF other than 1. And here there is. So that's 4. So you divide by 4 and you don't factor it. You literally want to get rid of it. And it becomes t minus 4. And this one does not have a GCF other than 1. So I'm not going to divide by 1, so it stays the same. So this is the correctly factored form of 4t squared minus 25t plus 36. Okay, and it works every single time. I guess it's an alternate, it's like a different version of factor by, not factor by grouping, it's a different version of the borrow payback method. I just find it to be more direct. If you were to solve it without dividing the GCF, you get the same answer. But anyway, if we solve t minus 4 equals 0, we're going to get t equals 4. If we solve 4t minus 9 equals 0, we add 9 to both sides, we get 4t equals 9. Then we divide by 4 and we get t equals 9 over 4. Only one of these is going to work. Now, it just said to solve, it didn't say to justify the solution set. So we're going to use our calculator to find out which one we want to reject. So remember, it's s equals square root of t minus 2t plus 6, and we want an output of 0. So I'm just literally going to input both values. So one of them was 4. So I'm substituting 4 for t, right? So if it was square root of t minus 2t plus 6, and you see I clearly got an output of 0. So 4 checks out. So this is good, so which means our answer is 4 hours, because t was the time in hours. Now if I do the same thing with 9 over 4, so if I change the 4 to 9 over 4 for the t value to be 9 over 4 hours, I end up getting 3 and not 0. So 9 over 4 is an extraneous root. It needs to be rejected. So we reject t equals 9 over 4. All right. and our answer is 4 hours when s equals 0. Okay? You could have used the quadratic formula. Um, it's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. You could have done factor by grouping, borrow payback. You could get the roots from the calculator and then factor backwards. Everything works, right? Whatever works for you. Completing the square might be a little messy depending on how you do it. Completing the square can always work. It just depends on how comfortable you are with it and like what method you use. Because there are different forms of completing the square than just. Anyway, I don't want to get into detail right now. But it said algebraically determine the time when s equals 0, and that's 4 hours. Okay. Now we're gonna do the next part, which is the last part. So I didn't feel like this was bad for a 6-point question. How much faster was the tidal wave traveling after 1 hour than 3 hours? Round to the nearest mile per hour, to the nearest whole number. Justify your answer. So guys, remember s is measured in hundreds of miles per hour. This is where they tried to throw us off. I'm going to treat it as function notation. So I'm going to rewrite the function s as s of t. Instead of s, I'll call it s of t is equal to square root of t minus 2t plus 6. Right? So I want to find out what's s of 1. It's going to be square root of 1. So this is after 1 hour minus 2 times 1 plus 6. Square root of 1 is just 1. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 minus 2 is negative 1, which when I add 6 becomes 5. So the speed, s of 1 is 5. Remember, s of t is measured in hundreds of miles per hour, so it's 500 miles per hour is the speed after 1 hour. So I want to do the same thing for s of 3. S of 3 will be the square root of 3 minus 2 times 3 plus 6. Square root of 3 doesn't simplify any farther. That's simplest radical form. Negative 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 3 is 6. And negative 6 plus 6 is 0. So s of 3 just becomes the square root of 3. And if I multiply by 100, the speed would be 100 radical 3 miles per hour. So if I subtract s of 1 minus s of 3, right? That becomes, no, not even s of 1 times s of 3, because s of 1 is just 5 and s of 3 is just radical 3. I'm going to subtract, the difference is going to be no more equal sign. I want to find the difference now, and I'll put that in blue. I'm going to take 500 minus 100 radical 3, and I want to round that to the nearest whole number. And it's about 326.8, which rounds to 327 miles per hour. So how much faster was the tidal wave traveling after 1 hour than 3 hours? S of 1 minus S of 3, but times 100. Round to the nearest mile per hour, which we did. Justify your answer, which we did. 327 miles per hour faster after hour 1 than it was after hour 3. Rounded to the nearest mile per hour, and we justified our answer. Okay? So that was it, guys. I thought this was really good for a 4-point question. You just need to know how to, you just need to be careful with the second part for a 6-point question. You have to be careful for the second part to round to the nearest whole number. Understand that s of t is in miles per hour, hundreds of miles per hour. And if you knew how to properly get this in quadratic, as a quadratic equal to 0, and either use the quadratic formula and factor and reject the extraneous root, all right? So I could understand why this would be a 6-point question, but let me come say goodbye. I don't want this video to drag on any longer. And if you want me to go over this a different way, whether that be factor by grouping, you want me to use the quadratic formula, if you want to see me how to, like, there are 3-4 different ways you could solve this by completing the square as well. Completing the square is more diversified than you might think. There's more than one way to use completing the square. I love completing the square. But anyway, let me come say goodbye and wish you luck and everything, all right? Thank you again for coming by. You made it to number 37. 6-point question. Thought it was not bad. And there's always opportunities for partial credit. So best of luck, guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe, send your friends over. The more the merrier. whatever it takes to help take you to the next level and make you ready and comfortable and confident coming into that exam, right? Or enriching your knowledge or whatever it takes, right? Um, so God bless you and thanks for stopping by. And if you have any questions, comments, let me know below and I'll answer. All right. Bye for now and best of luck.